A very good evening to you and welcome back to Checkpoint. We are delighted to have your company with us. My guest tonight here live on Checkpoint is Nzioka Waita. He is the Chief of Staff, President Uhuru Kenyatta's Chief of Staff, and also the head of the delivery unit. Thank you so much for making time for Checkpoint. I want to start with something you tweeted just the other day, and this is following your visit. Of course, the president was in China last week. You were part of the delegation, and you tweeted after a week of delicate negotiations, formal sanitary and phytosanitary agreements have been, or phyto, I don't know, have been signed between Kenya and China for Kenya's agri-produce to enter the Chinese market. Briefly, first, tell us a little bit more. What was this trip about, and what is it Kenya got out of it?
Okay, so China hosted the first ever import expo, and that should be a big signal to the world that a country of over 1.3 billion people is actively seeking import opportunities for the outside world to come and take advantage of that huge market. China is not your typical environment. China has a growing middle class, grows by 50 million people every year. That's a population of Kenya annually going into the middle class. They have money. They are a market that consumes 70% of whatever they produce. So there is a huge opportunity for countries like Kenya to now leverage its resources and its agricultural produce to now go and make commercial opportunities for its farmers and its business people. But so we went there to sit and start what would be negotiations that would typically take years to be actualized. So we went there, number one, to see the expo, to showcase the best of, the export import, to showcase the best of Kenya. And we also went there to commence negotiations on specific protocols. So the sanitary and phytosanitary agreements are protocols. They are basically the rules of engagement between two countries on how goods can be exported into their respective markets, the criteria for inspection, testing, disease management, quarantine controls. It's basically checks and measures that need to be put in place. Now, Kenya has not had a lot of these agreements in place. Therefore, some of the produce that leaves the country doesn't go to China directly. It goes through intermediaries, so third-party countries, Hong Kong, Vietnam, and others, who then take our products, and because of their direct agreements with China, are able to get them into the Chinese market.
So we're now able, as Kenya, to import directly which commodities to China?
So we're able to export.
Yes,
now,
export.
I need to put this into context. What we've done is to sign the agreements. There are two elements to this. One is we've signed the agreements that allow us to now take 13 items on our product list. So avocado, macadamia, skins and hides, mangoes, cashews, Bixa, and remember to ask me about Bixa again. Produce like Mir, Arabica,
so
Gum
that
Arabica.
Can be exported.
All that can be exported into China because the rules now for inspection are being agreed between the two parties.
But was market a challenge so that this door opening up in China is welcome news? Because there are those who argue markets have not really been a problem. Kenya has had the market.
Kenya has not had the market, and Kenya has not had the market. We might be exporting, but we're exporting to middlemen. So the whole effect is that it has suppressed the value right down to the farmer. What we would like to see is to open up direct opportunities for Kenyan business people to be able to transact directly with their Chinese counterparts and remove all the interlocutors in the middle and get better value. So long as our business people, Kenyan business people, can get more money out of these transactions, we'll be happy with that. But the second issue, which is more critical, is the issue of tariffs. So overcoming the scientific testing and inspection is one barrier. We have also, part of the agreements we signed was to commence trade tariff negotiations. So we need to be able to go product by product, coffee, tea, avocado, right down that list, and be able to agree with the Chinese government through their customs enforcement as to what tariffs would be levied on Kenya's goods when they land in China.
Okay. I like that you're talking about tariffs, because I wanted to listen to something the president said the other day when he was meeting the small and medium enterprise stakeholders. Yes. And some people were concerned about, an economist said, that is a statement likely to even ignite a trade war, if you like. So let's listen to President Uhuru Kenyatta speaking recently.
Vile tumeambiwa hapa juu ya samaki, jameni, tunatoa samaki kutoka China na wenzetu hapa ya? Hata kama finance bill imepita, think out of the box. Tunaweza kusema hiyo samaki ambayo imefika ni mbaya, na unaifungia. Kuna njia nyingi serikali inaweza kufanya kazi.
So that one would wonder, here's the president saying, as Chinese bring their products here, we can play almost, some would argue, underhand games and say that's bad and it has come. And it also could open a loophole for corruption, because if somebody can come and say, hey, give me some money and I'll pay you, I'll say your goods are good. On the other hand, you're talking with China about them, Kenya exporting to China. Was that statement that should have been made by the president?
I completely agree with what he said. I think the president was extremely clear that there is a challenge we have to confront. How is it possible that fish can come from China, land in Kisumu, cheaper than a fisherman being able to take fish from the lake and sell it at the market in Kisumu? There is a problem there.
But is that the solution?
So there are two things. Two things. And you know, when you play a clip, it's always good to play everything so that you see,
we'll play some more of it
the context of what was discussed.
Mm-hmm.
So a number of things were mentioned. One is that we have an extremely strong relationship with China. And we have a relationship that is moving more towards mutual benefit. So one of the discussions we are having is some of the more obvious discussions around really what are those things that should be coming into our market, and what are those opportunities that we should be able to access in the Chinese market, so as to deal with the trade imbalance. Today we have a trade imbalance between, we import goods close to $3.9 billion worth of goods from China, and we export under $100 million.
So what if that is a statement that the Chinese president was making to the traders there, that now we've signed this deal with Kenya, they will bring avocados and all these other goods, so when they bring, we can say they're bad. Do you see that
it's a negotiation
issue?
We raised the stakes. This is a negotiation of two parties.
You don't think it was reckless at all?
No, I don't think
and
so.
No tariff
I think the
barrier.
president is very clear that even when you get into a trading environment, he has a duty first and foremost to protect his people. And that is not something you negotiate as a head of state. You protect your people first. Everybody does it. Americans protect their farmers. The Europeans protect their farmers. Why should Kenyans protect their farmers?
But fish farming was doing well in Kenya until production went low and so opened the market for Chinese. So that on one hand...
No. Sophia, let's be clear about some of the challenges we face. Today, even if you closed the borders and said no fish to come from outside, you have big consumers of fish. Let's take an example. You have a chain like Java that consumes upwards of 600 kilos of fish fillet every day. They cannot find a supplier in Kenya. Even when they put it out commercially without any interference of any sort, they cannot find. Now, why does that happen? So we have a structural defect in the way we did some of our devolved functions, particularly on agriculture, where in terms of supporting right down to the grassroots, there are some elements that need to be rebuilt, fisheries being one of them. So if you take, for instance, the cold chain. So you're a farmer. I mean, you're a fisherman in Homa Bay.
Right.
You fish. You come to the beach. No cold chain. So there's no storage. So you're forced immediately to offload what you have at salvage value. It's then picked. It comes with canters to Gikomba in the market. In Gikomba, again, no cold storage. So the guy in Gikomba also has to offload it again to butcheries and other people. again at salvage value.
Okay.
So what's happening, because we've not done enough as government and as devolved units to strengthen the whole value chain of fisheries by, number one, giving our fishermen the right equipment, supporting their feeds. A lot of the feeds now given by commercial fishermen, commercial cage fish farmers, is imported.
Right.
We still tax it.
So I want to take us back to that meeting, and you are head of delivery, pretty much helping the president, perhaps advising him on this is how we need to go about delivering. But this is an admission that he made to a critical sector in this country, the SMEs. Let's listen to that statement.
Leo hii siwezi kusoma, mimi nina aibu kubwa sana, siwezi kusoma hii. Kwa sababu kwa ukweli hatujawatendea haki kulingana na ile mahitaji ambayo mko nayo.
For the president in that point to put aside his prepared speech and to, in a sense, admit we've wronged you, we've failed you. SMEs who already are struggling with government borrowing internally, locally, that is squeezing them out. It's what the private sector players have argued, that it is a problem. An economist, let me finish the point, but also the interest rates cap, the pending bills as well for these SMEs. Wasn't for you and the rest of the team working with the president, having prepared these remarks of all these things that have been done, for him to turn around and say that, a letdown in helping him deliver?
He was disappointed. But the whole point of organizing that round table was for the government, led by the president and the deputy president, to go and sit with a very different constituency that they have not sat with before and listen. So the essence of that engagement was not for the president to go and pontificate to this audience. His was to go and listen and hear them out. Of course, he had prepared text because we had received a memorandum and there were issues that we needed to address. But I think sitting there in front of that audience and listening to each of those issues being raised, there were questions that begged, and even for us as the people who execute on behalf of the president, we did find that, of course, we've fallen short. We have fallen short of what the expectation would be. And, that meeting came out of, I'm sure you had seen the level of unrest before there was with SMEs and small and micro businesses, because we frequently have roundtables with the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers under that umbrella. But those are typically big policy issues. They are big helicopter view issues that deal with, for example, the issue of counterfeiting and illicits. So on one hand, when you deal with counterfeits and illicit, you help big companies benefit.
Right.
But you had the smaller companies who actually are the importers of those things. And the only reason they're importing them is because they're able to trade them. And they may not have been aware even that these things were contraband or illicit. So there has been some difficulty in balancing those two issues. But the president put a small team together. He appointed a specialist SME advisor to work with the Ministry of Industry and his office to find and ring-fence the issues that touch on these businesses, pay them specific attention, bring those issues back to the cabinet, and then help us to put the right policies and actions in place to deal with that.
Yeah.
So I'm quite confident that that meeting, however antagonistic it was, at least in terms of the expectations of the president, it had very positive outcomes.
Are there goals? Because the concern here for them would be promises had been made, they were not kept. The president was clearly not happy about that. You're talking about a team being set up. And the question they'd ask, because we had a recent conversation with them here, and they've been sending pictures of some of the goods that they've brought in Mombasa in containers, not being able to release them, the water is flooding. So they have many issues. Is there a timetable of sorts to say this is what we're going to do by this time?
So there are many things happening. You've mixed up many issues. There are issues with importers. Those importers, some of them are SME, some of them are tycoons sitting in this town. Some claim to be small business people. They have £1 billion shillings worth of goods sitting in the port.
For genuine SMEs and resolving their issues,
so
is
the
there
genuine
a timeline?
SMEs, there are issues. For example, there were issues around the markets. What are we doing about the markets? If you go to Gikomba today, work has begun on the new market. If you go to Westlands Market today, it's being completed. We should be able to open it first quarter of 2019.
Okay.
There are 7 markets done both by national government and by the county government of Nairobi that are well on the way to being completed. We have issues touching on value chains that are specific, like leather. So if you go to Uhuru Market, for example, that's the home of, business people who have been in the leather sector for years. What have we done for them? So
pending bills?
Rehabilitation of that. Pending bills, we are now, I think we've whittled down, we've paid over 70 billion shillings now of pending bills, but the pending bills were at different levels. So you have pending bills for large companies that were doing mostly infrastructure work, and then there's AGPO. So we've deliberately prioritized all the AGPO payments, all the payments due for businesses owned by young people and by women and for persons with disabilities. So that has been happening. As you speak now, money has been released. Could we do it better? Yes.
Faster? Because there are those watching and saying, I've waited for so long.
Faster and more efficient.
Yeah.
In fairness, we have caused a number of those businesses huge distress, largely because of our when we look at the public finance management, there's some things that can be refined. So between June and September, there was not much movement, largely because of we were going to what we call the fiscal cliff because of what was happening with the budget negotiations.
Right.
And the price of democracy now, because you have to negotiate a budget, the reason why we have parliament there is that parliament has to approve. And if they're not convinced, they don't pass it. And if they pass something different and it doesn't work for the government, then you have to go back. Okay. And that's just part of the process.
So better could be done. I want us to talk about, as you deliver, you need money. You need finances, capital to be able to do the various projects. And what we have seen the Kenyatta administration since he came into office in 2013 is the debt triple, 3 times is a lot. 3.5 trillion is what we are talking about. So that 2018-2019, repayment of debt stands at 870 billion shillings. Our revenue is 1.6 trillion shillings. So this speaks to almost, 55-60% of what we are getting going to pay debt. Are you concerned with the debt situation? Because many economists say our borrowing appetite is out of control. The president justifies by saying we don't have enough money, so we have to borrow. Some argue, but what are those tangibles that this money has gone to that we can speak of today, and what has it spurred to then create wealth?
So let's retreat.
Are you concerned about the debt question?
No, I'm not, because
level?
the debt question is a product of a very imaginative media. And I'll say this for many reasons. The deficit today is about 7.5%, right? We would like to get it to sub 5% over the next 2 years, right? Our ability to service our debt has never been questioned by any institution.
Have we not borrowed to pay, borrow from Peter to pay John?
How do you build your house? Show me a Kenyan that invests purely out of their salary. You're either a member of a SACCO or you go borrow a loan. How do you develop?
When IMF says we're in debt distress.
When did IMF say that?
The last statement that came out, they said it was medium debt distress.
I think there is a question here of fabrication. If today Kenya was declared as being in a distressed situation by the IMF, this place would shut down. The reality is no such thing has happened. We had a standby guarantee given to us for Forex by IMF. It was withdrawn. Everyone said, including some of these busybody economists, that the country would shut down the next day, the exchange rate will fluctuate. Nothing happened. In fact, what happened, we have $9 billion of Forex reserves. Our currency is perhaps one of the strongest currencies in Africa today as we speak. There has been not so much as a blip in our foreign exchange versus currencies, external currencies. So I don't understand this creation of a crisis about debt that doesn't exist.
So let me ask you, if you're earning 10
there's
shillings...
no corresponding conversation, Sophia, about what are you doing with this money?
We'll go there. I'm just getting first to what the concern place, where, say for instance, you're earning 10 shillings.
Yes.
And every other month, 6 shillings is going to pay debt.
Yes.
At a personal level, would you feel your financial status is working out well?
It depends on what my long-term ambition is. If I'm living from hand to mouth and only worried about what goes on in the evening, of course I'd be worried. But if I have a plan and I have clarity about what I want to do, Kenya is not a 5-year plan. We have to stop thinking in 5-year cycles. You know, the people we are competing with across the world are doing 100-year plans. They sit together and think about, what will this country look like for my children?
So what has this borrowing done for Kenya?
Tell me anywhere in this country where you walk to today, anywhere in Kenya, any county, anywhere where there are no new roads, no new bridges, infrastructure that is being put. We had a deficit for over 24 years. This country had no infrastructure being built. Nothing was happening. So when you ask yourselves, how are farmers going to get their produce to market? How are people going to move from point A to point B today? If you ask somebody 5 years ago how long it took for them to get to Moyale, they'll tell you it was something they needed to plan for months and months. Today they can go in the morning, get there in the evening, turn around and be back in Nairobi tomorrow without having the need for a police escort. Today, if you want to drive down to Kisii, you can go to Kisii for lunch and be back. You know, all this is happening off the back of a future-proof investment in filling in the infrastructure deficit. Without roads, without bridges, without a proper logistics system, this country will go nowhere. Now, it's only Kenyans, especially the media, that don't see this, because everybody else, including multilateral institutions, see the benefit of what has been happening,
so
which is why you move from 139 or so position of ease of doing business 5 years ago to 61.
So let me ask this. SGR, to you, is it a 21st century rail?
SGR is what we needed for the time that we are in.
Because that is what the president promised in 2013.
Yes, and that's what he delivered.
What has been argued is that it is not a 21st century railway system. The deputy president was talking about it breaking even by end of year. That again has been called into question because the cargo that it's meant to be carrying, we're still seeing many of these trucks on the road as opposed to what we're told this will do. So the question becomes, yes, you're saying we're building roads, but every so often it rains, potholes, recarpeting, so that is it value for money? You put it into this, there are those who feel SGR, it was overpaid, too much money went into that. The roads, we keep recarpeting, it rains, flooding, all of these other issues are happening. So at yes, you see you've done 1, 2, 3. Then there are those who look on the other side and say, but it's not really working because we're still going back to fix that. What do you tell people with those concerns?
I tell them to look at the facts. From the very beginning, the SGR was only purposed to carry 40% of the traffic, the total traffic between Nairobi and Mombasa. You know, and that has never been something that we, as an administration, we have fudged about. Now, is the SGR operating optimally? Is there room for improvement? Certainly there is.
Yes.
Can we do more in terms of the quality and value for money? That is a big issue, and yes. But also these questions go right down to the bottom, right down to implementing agencies. A lot of these roads that people see, particularly in their backyard areas, those are roads that are now belong to administrations at a local level. You know, what are they doing with the money that has been devolved to them? In cases like Nairobi, where we are now collaborating with the county government on the regeneration program, you have over 87 kilometers of new roads being built in Nairobi alone. You know, and that does have an uplifting effect. Will this happen overnight? Will you see, you know, a magical shift in terms of, you know, the economy turning overnight? No, you won't. But it will be a gradual shift. But it won't happen unless we double down on our investment in infrastructure, get it right.
So there will be more borrowing, in your view, to make sure you fulfill what it is you aim to?
I think for us, everything again is contextual. A lot of the big programs we are doing, we are only borrowing where those programs cannot be executed through PPP. So for example, there are roads which we don't need to do through government exchequer. Nakuru Mau Summit, that is private. We're looking right now at Naivasha, Mai Mahiu to Mombasa on the motorway. Again, that is private funding that will come into that.
Yeah.
You have Keno to Nanyuki to Isiolo. Again, that will be private money.
Okay, so I want to, before we go on break very quickly on this one, would you then say all of the money borrowed and raised, because there's a whole concern about corruption and leakages, are you confident that all of it has gone to every project, or that concern of those leakages and looting, it has been a big problem?
You know, I think I agree with you. Has there been leakage? There could be leakage. There could be value for money questions. But there has not been any administration since we raised our flag in 1963 that has dealt so decisively with corruption. Never before have you seen the kind of resources pumped into investigative agencies to do their work. They have a free hand to do their work. They have no interference. They have done a remarkable job over the last 1 year to start dealing with institutionalized graft.
Okay.
And I think we ought to give credit to those institutions, because those men and women have done a fantastic job in putting prosecutable cases in front of the judiciary.
And we'll talk more about that after the break, especially away from the punitive aspect, the preventative aspect of fighting corruption, and what more can be done to make sure we're not just fighting, but we're preventing. Stay with us right here on Checkpoint. We'll be right back.